Excellencies, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, the meeting is called to order. It is an honor and privilege for me to join you today to preside over the closing of the 76th session of the Commission. As we meet in a virtual fashion, owing to the COVID-19 pandemic, before we move ahead with our deliberations, may I call upon the Secretary of the Commission to make some housekeeping announcements. You have the floor, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, allow me to add my greetings this morning to everybody participating in the 77th session of the Commission. Before we move on, I would like to take a few minutes to provide information regarding the conduct of the session and about Kudo, the e-conferencing platform that we are using today. We welcome also participants joining us through YouTube. We had a test run last week, and I hope most of you were able to attend. We also sent to all delegates a user guide with instructions for using Kudo. To select the language in which you prefer to follow the meeting, please go to the Language Selector drop-down menu in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. You will see the 4 official languages used by ESCAP, as well as the choice for International Sign Language. When you want to make an intervention, kindly click the Request to Speak button. When the chair calls upon you to take the floor, the microphone and camera icons will turn red. Please click Unmute and turn on and deliver your intervention. Do not click Release Mic until you have completed your intervention, as this will cancel your request. Once you have completed your intervention, kindly click Release Mic. For technical issues related to Kudo, kindly click Technical Support tab under the messaging icon and type your message there. Our technician will assist you shortly. The Secretariat will be monitoring the messaging in Kudo. However, the Secretariat kindly requests that all substantive questions or interventions be raised through the Request to Speak button only. And finally, to prevent echoes and interference, please stay on the floor language when you speak and ensure all other devices connected to Kudo in the same room are turned off. Kindly note that remote simultaneous interpretation of the proceedings is provided by the United Nations for the purpose of facilitating communication, in light of the fact that there are 6 official languages of the UN, 4 of which are used at ESCAP. Participants are requested to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working in remote mode, and of the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed to the interpreters. Only the speech or intervention in the regional language is authentic and constitute an authentic record of the proceedings. In case of any inconsistency between the interpretation and the speech or intervention in the regional language, the latter shall prevail. In addition, interpreters servicing remote meetings cannot be held liable for interruption of service, pixelation, freezing, or loss of visual input, partial or complete loss of audio, audible artifacts, unauthorized access to personal or confidential data, leaking of information due to inadequate soundproofing, and/or data loss. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you to the Secretariat. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, before we proceed with today's agenda, please allow me to say a few words about the work of the Commission since it last met in May 2020. The 76th session of the Commission was convened in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Although the overall COVID-19 situation in Thailand in 2020 was relatively stable and under control, health measures in various degrees were in place throughout the year to contain the spread of the virus and to ensure public safety, including the restriction of travel into the kingdom. As host country, Thailand continues to work closely with ESCAP to ensure that it is able to perform its functions and deliver on its mandates of serving countries in the region, including supporting countries in their response to the pandemic. Over the course of the year, the government has facilitated the return to duty of approximately 800 ESCAP and other UN personnel, as well as their family members. As the Commission will soon begin its 77th session, I would like to take this opportunity to reaffirm Thailand's steadfast commitment to continue supporting the work of ESCAP in advancing the region's response and recovery from the COVID-19 crisis and sustainable development. I would now like to highlight some of the significant achievements of the Commission during the 76th session. Further to the adoption of the Resolution 76/2 on regional cooperation to address the socio-economic effects of pandemics and crises in Asia and Pacific, the work of the Commission has largely focused on supporting countries in Asia Pacific respond to and recover from the pandemic. Recognizing that COVID-19 has further demonstrated the importance of digital connectivity, the third session of the Committee on Information and Communications Technology, Science, Technology and Innovation recommended expanding regional collaboration to scale up broadband internet capacities, called for the active participation of governments, the private sector, and all concerned stakeholders in bridging the digital divide, and recommended the development of an action plan for the next phase of implementation of the master plan for the Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway for 2022 to 2026. Convened at a time when data is increasingly critical, the seventh session of the Committee on Statistics endorsed the monitoring and evaluation framework for the collective framework for action and the declaration on navigating policy with data to leave no one behind. The COVID-19 pandemic has also shown the critical importance of social protection, and in this connection, the sixth session of the Committee on Social Development endorsed the action plan to strengthen regional cooperation on social protection in Asia and the Pacific, which will help countries in the region broaden social protection and leave no one behind. Against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, the sixth session of the Committee on Transport called for a rethink of the future development of transport connectivity and mobility in the region to ensure the transport sector meets the objectives of economic, social, and environmental sustainability. Recognizing the environmental roots of the pandemic, the sixth session of the Committee on Environment and Development called upon countries to further protect the health of people and of the planet, and decided to establish a technical expert group on environment and development to facilitate the exchange of information among countries and various stakeholders in the region. Recognizing that international trade and investment and resilient supply chains are indispensable for the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, the seventh session of the Committee on Trade and Investment endorsed a number of recommendations to the Commission in support of COVID-19 recovery and building greater cooperation among countries. As for the third session of the Committee on Energy, it recognized that the region's move towards a sustainable, low-carbon energy future is now more critical than ever to build back better, and accordingly endorsed the regional roadmap on power system connectivity, promoting cross-border electricity connectivity for sustainable development. And finally, the 8th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development called attention to the devastating socio-economic impacts of the pandemic across the region and resulting diminished prospects for achieving this 2030 agenda. It emphasized the resolve of member states to ensure that no one is left behind and to build back better in line with the 2030 agenda. What I have just recounted represents only a sample of the work accomplished by the Commission, while a lot remains to be accomplished. The Commission's role in supporting member states to reinvigorate and strengthen collective actions through international cooperation and multilateralism in overcoming future crises and achieving sustainable development is crucial. The time has come to deepen partnerships on the basis of unity and solidarity, and to find new solutions to building back better, stronger, and greener. I look forward to our deliberations this year on the key issue of Building Back Better from Crises through Regional Cooperation in Asia and the Pacific. I thank you for your attention. Excellencies, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, it is now my pleasure to conduct the election of officers for the 77th session of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. In line with the rules of procedure and as per usual practice, the Commission will elect from among its members a chair and 2 vice chairs. However, if the plenary so decides, the rule may be applied differently today for the 77th session to accommodate the extraordinary circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic and elect a chair and 4 vice chairs of the session. Before we proceed with the election of the chair, I would like to express my deep appreciation to the chair of the Informal Working Group on Draft Resolutions, His Excellency Mr. Asim Iftikhar Ahmad, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Permanent Representative of Pakistan to ESCAP, and the Vice Chair of the Informal Working Group, Mr. Andrew Byrne, Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to ESCAP, for guiding the deliberations of the Informal Working Group to a successful conclusion within the space of not so many days. So, with this in mind, may I seek nominations for the chair and vice chairs of the 77th session of the Commission. I recognize the Ambassador of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I have the pleasure in proposing the nominations of the chair and vice chairs for the 77th session of the Commission as follows. As chair, His Excellency Mr. Mukhtar Bardi, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan. As vice chairs, 4 nominations. Her Excellency Mrs. Millicent Cruz Paredes, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Philippines. Second, Her Excellency Mrs. Suchitra Durai, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of India. Third nomination, His Excellency Mr. Timur Amarsana, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Mongolia. Fourth nomination goes to Mr. Paul Stephens, Deputy Chief of Mission and Permanent Representative of Australia. I'm sure that the distinguished delegates, which I have proposed, will discharge their duties efficiently for the successful deliberations. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished Ambassador of Bangladesh. The distinguished Ambassador of Bangladesh has nominated His Excellency Mr. Mokhtar Tulubedi, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, as Chair of the 77th session of the Commission, and Her Excellency Ms. Millicent Cruz Paredes, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Permanent Representative of the Philippines to ESCAP, Her Excellency Mrs. Suchitra Durai, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Permanent Representative of India to ESCAP, His Excellency Mr. Timur Amarsana, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Permanent Representative of Mongolia to ESCAP, and Mr. Paul Stephens, Minister and Deputy Chief of Mission and Permanent Representative of Australia to ESCAP, as Vice Chairs of the session. Would any delegations like to second the nomination made by distinguished Ambassador of Bangladesh. I recognize the delegation of Japan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have the great pleasure in seconding the nominations of the chair and vice chairs of the 77th session of the Commission as proposed by His Excellency Ambassador of Bangladesh. I, too, am confident that under their most able leadership, the 77th session will be led to a successful conclusion. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Japan. Are there any other nominations for the Bureau of the 77th session of the Commission? I see none. It is my great pleasure then to declare His Excellency Mr. Mokhtar Tulabede, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, duly elected as the chair of the 77th session of the Commission, and Her Excellency Ms. Millicent Cruz Paredes, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Permanent Representative of the Philippines, Her Excellency Mrs. Suchitra Turai, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Permanent Representative of India, His Excellency Mr. Tumo Amasana, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Permanent Representative of Mongolia, and Mr. Paul Stevens, Minister and Deputy Chief of Mission and Permanent Representative of Australia as Vice Chairs of the session. Please join me in congratulating the new elected Chair and Vice Chairs. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is now my honor to invite His Excellency Mr. Mokhtar Tulabede, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, the chair of the 77th session, to conduct the meeting from this point onward. You have the floor, Mr. Minister.
Thank you. Excellencies, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, I thank you all for the confidence placed in me and great honor that you have bestowed on my country and on me. Together with the Honorable Vice Chairs and with the support of the ESCAP Secretariat, I shall endeavor to discharge the responsibilities of serving as your chair to the very best of my abilities. Madam Executive Secretary, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Kazakhstan highly commends the crucial role played by ESCAP in promoting inclusive and sustainable economic and social development, reducing inequalities and expanding opportunities of the people in Asia and the Pacific, the largest and fastest growing region of the world. The UNESCAP's role is becoming even more essential today when the entire humanity is facing global transformation amid unprecedented challenges. The greatest challenge of our age, COVID-19 pandemic, continues to grow and cause deep suffering in every country of Asia and Pacific. The pandemic has exposed our vulnerabilities, deepened existing inequalities among people and nations, and reversed our collective development gains. Therefore, the main topic of our current session is building back better from crisis through regional cooperation in Asia and the Pacific. I wish to thank the Secretariat for its theme study on the socio-economic impacts of the pandemic in the countries of Asia and Pacific, which is centered around 4 critical intercontinental areas: sustained recovery, social protection, strengthened connectivity, and climate change. Distinguished delegates, we must remember that in crisis comes an opportunity. Every crisis causes us to reconsider our present and propels us into the better future. And we can build back for better, greener, more efficient, fair, and inclusive world. Recovering from this crisis will need truly innovative solutions and urgent collective efforts that no country can do alone. It will require all society, all of government, and all of the world approach, strong political will, and bold leadership, driven by compassion and solidarity. Our main challenge is the post-pandemic socio-economic recovery and practical deliverables within Agenda 2030. Recovery from the pandemic needs to begin with the development of strong and resilient health system with equitable and unhindered access to vaccines. We must take the politics out of the vaccine and ensure that vaccine production and distribution is implemented on the basis of science and global public health needs. The current economic crisis has set back progress to all of us, but vulnerable groups of countries such as LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. These countries have faced a deadly combination of declining foreign investment, trade, and remittances, growing debt burdens, and severely reduced fiscal spaces. As a result, LLDC economies contracted an average 2.4% in 2020, pushing many people into poverty. Therefore, it's critical to financially support vulnerable countries in boosting their urgently needed resilient infrastructure and trade facilitation mechanism for the smooth flow of goods, which is critical to their recovery. In this regard, President of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, at the high-level event on international debt architecture and liquidity on 29 March 2021, called for relieving the debt burden on national budgets of developing countries in exchange for increased investment in healthcare and regional development projects. We believe that our urgent coordinated action on these proposals will help us to get back on track for accelerated SDGs decade of action, probably the most critical decade of our generation. A comprehensive UN roadmap to accelerate implementation of the 2014-2024 Vienna Program of Action initiated by Kazakhstan as the global chair of the LLDC group in 2020-2021 is another important tool in this regard. The pandemic clearly demonstrated that our countries need joint efforts in achieving the digital transformation necessary to better meeting today's societal challenges. Another priority area for the post-COVID recovery is environmental protection. Today, the climate change is existential crisis for our civilization, and there is no alternative for all our nations to developing decarbonized economy, green technology, efficient land and water management. Current crisis gives us unique opportunity to put environmental protection at the forefront of international agenda. Climate change is one of the top priorities of Kazakhstan. Last December at the Climate Ambitious Summit, President Tokayev has pledged to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. Tackling climate change is needed costly, however, inaction could lead to fatal damage. The loss of life and economic disaster caused by the pandemic are signs of what will happen if we do not eliminate the world carbon emissions. Dear friends, Asia and Pacific is the vast area with 60% of the world population, economic and trade volume. To achieve greater results on such diverse and complex region, we must strengthen our collaboration both at the regional and sub-regional levels. Only through joint efforts, our countries could turn our region into a zone of peace, cooperation, and development. In the recent years, Central Asia sub-region has been undergoing rapid transformation marked by significant expansion of regional cooperation and various fields. To coordinate development efforts in our sub-region, we intend to institutionalize the UN-led regional SDGs Center for Central Asia in our former capital, Almaty city. In this regard, we are grateful that Almaty was chosen as the location of the ESCAP sub-regional office for North and Central Asia. Before closing, let me express once more my sincere gratitude to the ESCAP Secretariat for its constant support and in strengthening the fruitful and mutually beneficial cooperation among the distinguished nations of Asia and the Pacific. In conclusion, I wish all participants and ESCAP Secretariat a very successful 77th session of the Commission, and thank you. Excellencies, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, we will now move to agenda item 1C, adoption of the agenda. The provisional agenda for the 77th session of the Commission is contained in document ESCAP/77/L.1. Does any delegation have any comments on the agenda? I see none. May I propose to the Commission that the provisional agenda as contained in document ESCAP/77/L.1 be adopted. The agenda is adopted. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the President of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkir, has recorded a video message for the occasion of the Commission session. May I invite the conference room to play the video.
Excellencies, thank you for the opportunity to address the 77th session of the Economic Commission for Asia and the Pacific. The theme of the session, Building Back Better, is timely. Not since the founding of the UN has the entire planet faced such an obstacle as COVID-19. Not since then have we had an opportunity to completely and fundamentally change the patterns and systems that our world runs upon. For all its tragedy, COVID-19 must also be recognized for the opportunity that it is. We have before us unparalleled levels of political and public will, coupled with the availability of incredible resources. There has never been a better time for change, to build a world that is safer, more resilient, sustainable, greener, and more equitable. In doing so, we must follow the goals and targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, which offer us a blueprint for a sustainable recovery. By working together, we can turn what has been a global setback into a springboard to a better future. Asia-Pacific is an economic powerhouse, abundant in resources, skills, and knowledge. These capacities must be tapped into and coordinated to strengthen the region. A Build Back Better approach can simultaneously support pandemic recovery and in the process address pre-existing vulnerabilities such as rapid urbanization, poverty, or environmental degradation. Excellencies, the actions we take as we emerge from this pandemic will define generations to come. This can be the moment that we pivot away from inequality, instability, and unsustainability, and build a world with the foundation to persevere and thrive. Such a monumental undertaking requires a whole-of-society approach, and the multilateral system, including regional commissions such as ESCAP, must be at the heart of this. I call on all leaders, including those of ESCAP, to champion a sustainable development green approach, to build back better from the pandemic. Our collective action has the potential to lay the foundation for long-term cooperation and for a future that offers more opportunity, more equality, more security, and more prosperity. Let us embrace this. I look forward to the outcome of your deliberations, and thank you very much for having me.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the 76th President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, His Excellency Mr. Munir Akram, has recorded a video message for the occasion of the Commission's session. May I invite the conference room officer to play the video.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the Executive Secretary of ESCAP for inviting me to address the 77th session of the ESCAP. Today, we are meeting at an inflection point in history as the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered the worst economic crisis since 1930 while inflicting unimaginable human suffering. The pandemic has laid bare the inherent inequalities and vulnerabilities of our global system. It has also vividly manifested that the world is on an unsustainable path. We had waged a war against nature, and as the Secretary General has stated, and I quote, "Nature is fighting back," unquote. It is obvious that the development policies pursued by industrialized countries of the past 2 centuries are responsible for environmental degradation, loss of biodiversity, and soaring inequalities within and among nations. Therefore, when we strive for building back better, we must focus on inclusive, sustainable, and resilient recovery. We need to holistically reorient our development strategies to address systemic and structural challenges in the global system. Excellencies, the COVID-19 pandemic is a crisis of humanity. Recovery from it will require global solidarity and commitment from everyone, everywhere. At the cusp of the crisis, my Prime Minister, Imran Khan of Pakistan, announced a 5-point action agenda to recover better from the pandemic. It included equitable and affordable supply of the COVID vaccine to developing countries, debt relief, a new general allocation of SDRs, and a redistribution of existing unutilized SDRs, return of stolen assets, and combating illicit financial flows, as well as mobilizing the $100 billion annually promised by developed countries for climate action. I am glad that a consensus has evolved at the UN's ECOSOC Forum on Financing for Development on most of these action points. The universal access to safe, early, effective, and affordable vaccines is the only way to end the pandemic, to support economic recovery, and realize the Sustainable Development Goals. Vaccines for COVID-19 should be declared a global public good. Without universal vaccination, the virus will roam, mutate, and return. I have recently convened a special meeting of ECOSOC on a vaccine for all, which outlined the path towards a coordinated global effort to ensure equitable access to the vaccine based on the principles of solidarity, equity, and sharing. I am happy to share its results with the ESCAP members for their consideration. It is obvious that fiscal needs of developing countries could be met by providing debt relief measures as well as by significantly expanding concessional finance for developing countries, such as through the IDA allocations and the fulfillment of the 0.7% ODA target. I also strongly believe that the recommendations contained in the report of the FACTI panel to thwart trillions of dollars of illicit financial flows from developing countries needs serious consideration by the members of ESCAP. As the faculty report says, I quote, these could enable the developing countries to eradicate poverty, reduce inequalities, build back better after the COVID crisis, address climate change, and strengthen human rights, unquote. Excellencies, if we are to build back better, we need to accelerate investments in sustainable infrastructure, which impact 92% of the SDGs, as well as the goals of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Unfortunately, investments in infrastructure declined by $50 billion last year. Yet, the money is available. Asset managers hold an estimated $378 trillion, which are earning low or no returns. 1% of these assets would be sufficient to fund all the investment needs of the developing countries. I have proposed that the SDG investment fair, where governments present specific projects and concrete investment opportunities to the investor community, should be turned into a standing forum that is convened virtually round the year to bring together investors and governments with bankable projects. The investment fair can serve as an umbrella platform to bring together all the other platforms that have been set up for a coordinated and coherent approach to investment in sustainable infrastructure. The COVID-19 pandemic has also demonstrated the necessity of leaving no one behind in the sphere of digitalization. Bridging the digital divide is an important catalyst to allow developing countries to leapfrog into the development models of the future. In the long run, it would be unavoidable to address the structural barriers that hamper economic growth of developing countries. These include inequitable trade, taxation, and technology regimes, as well as unfair investment treaties. It is only by addressing these issues that we can build back better and enable the developing countries to unshackle the potential of their people, the majority of whom are living in the ESCAP region. I thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has conveyed a message to the Commission, and I am pleased to invite the Executive Secretary, Ms. Armida Sarsia Ali-Jabana, to read the message of the Secretary General and to deliver her welcome and policy statement.
Honorable Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I have the privilege to read statement of the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, as follows. My greetings to all those gathered for this 77th session of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. The COVID-19 pandemic is the greatest test the world has faced in generations. Many people and communities are still suffering deeply, both from the disease and from its economic and social impact. The rollout of vaccines, including through the Global Vaccine Equity Mechanism, or COVAX, is offering hope. Yet we still see uneven access to this global public good around the world and within countries. Everyone, everywhere must have access to vaccines. And social and economic support must be targeted at the most vulnerable and marginalized groups who have been disproportionately affected. Looking forward, recovery plans cannot be based on outdated, unsustainable economic models. Investments to rebuild the economy must be centered around inclusive, sustainable development that prioritizes people and planet. Many ESCAP members are charting a course towards a strong recovery from the pandemic by committing to net zero emissions and green growth. But across the Asia-Pacific region, millions of people remain highly vulnerable and at risk. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is our blueprint for a strong recovery that leaves no one behind. that starts with universal health coverage and social protection and decent work. We must also strengthen trade and transport cooperation and bridge the digital divide within and among countries. This will require the creation of fiscal space, including through debt relief and reforms to the debt architecture. And we must make peace with nature and redouble our efforts to tackle the climate crisis, investing in renewable energy, sustainable food systems, and nature-based solutions. This is a pivotal year for people, economies, societies, and our planet. Together, let's build a strong recovery from the pandemic, relaunch the Decade of Action for the Sustainable Development Goals, and create cleaner, greener, and more inclusive economies and societies that provide opportunities for all. Thank you. End of Secretary General Guterres' statement. Honorable Chair, with your permission, may I now read my remarks and policy statement. Honorable Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, welcome to the 77th session of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. It is both an honor and privilege for me to greet so many distinguished delegates and colleagues from across our region. At this point in time, it goes without saying that the COVID-19 pandemic has touched each one of us and overshadowed every conversation. This health crisis, together with measures to mitigate its impacts, have deeply affected countries of Asia and the Pacific, both economically and socially, over the past year. The attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals in Asia and the Pacific is at stake. The ongoing rollout of vaccines in the region offers hope for recovery. Yet, no country will be fully secure when others are still fighting the pandemic. We must ensure that the vaccines are affordable and accessible to all if we are to recover better together. Excellencies, since the adoption of Resolution 76/2 on regional cooperation to address the socio-economic effects of pandemic and crisis in Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP has mobilized its resources together with UN system and in tandem with member states to strengthen the resilience of healthcare systems. We launched the action plan to strengthen regional cooperation on social protection in Asia and the Pacific. Despite limited fiscal space and debt burden, governments have instituted fiscal and monetary stimulus programs. We supported country efforts in the issuance of sovereign bonds and operationalization of public-private partnership networks for ensuring a sustainable economic recovery. ESCAP worked with member states to overcome supply chain and connectivity disruptions resulting from border closures. The Framework Agreement on Facilitation of Cross-Border Paperless Trade in Asia and the Pacific, which entered into force in February 2021, is an important step forward. Increased use of digital technologies has likewise allowed delivery of public services in ways that were previously inconceivable. Climate change continues to be a crisis in the backdrop of this pandemic. We have worked with member states to advance long-term solutions, including National Roadmap for Energy Transition, geospatial and modeling application for disaster management, and the use of geostationary satellite for air pollution monitoring, among other things. These policy actions have been presented in our studies on the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19, as well as this year's theme study, and considered in our regional conversation and high-level dialogues. Excellencies, allow me to highlight 4 priority areas that are necessary to ensure a recovery in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development for your further deliberations and guidance. The first priority area is to integrate health risk management into our socio-economic policies and strategies. Governments need to build a resilient health system and universal healthcare coverage together with communities and relevant stakeholders. The social protection policies must be scaled up to include informal sector workers, persons with disabilities and older persons, as well as vulnerable and marginalized segments of the population. A second priority area is sustainable financing. that prioritizes investment in resilient economies through targeted fiscal and monetary policies. We need to create fiscal space and explore alternate sources of innovative financing. Public debt sustainability concerns need to be addressed. I welcome concrete steps taken towards the debt service suspension initiative and targeted debt relief efforts that would provide much-needed liquidity, especially for the vulnerable developing countries. Regional connectivity with built-in resiliency is the third priority area for facilitating risk-informed development. There is a clear need to promote digital trade and contactless trade facilitation. In our region, coordinated regional and sub-regional approaches have facilitated cross-border transport connectivity. Restarting our economies also requires governments to proactively harness investment, tourism, and the creative economy, as well as energy and digital connectivity. The fourth priority area is ensuring that a post-COVID-19 recovery is stronger, cleaner, and greener. It is high time for governments to adopt a climate and environmentally responsive approach in line with the Paris Agreement. Let us now urgently invest in renewable energy, energy-efficient production system, green infrastructure, and ecosystem restoration. As we move towards recovery, our efforts must take into account the aspirations of all countries, including the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states of Asia and the Pacific. Excellencies, more than ever before, the full potential of inclusive and network multilateralism should be tapped. International development cooperation, including South-South and triangular cooperation, must be further harnessed. Knowledge sharing, technical and research capacities should be strengthened. Collaboration with sub-regional organizations to promote cooperation throughout Asia and the Pacific could form the foundations for an effective regional response and build back better in a post-COVID-19 era. Excellencies, I'm honored to have the presence of many heads of state and government to guide our course of action. We count on your strong leadership and commitment to solidarity and trust. I thank the Royal Thai government and all member states for their unwavering support for ESCAP work and the successful convening of the 77th session of the Commission. As we approach our 75th anniversary next year, let us forge a common agenda to fully recover from COVID-19 pandemic and to advance sustainable development through regional cooperation in Asia and the Pacific. I wish you a very successful Commission. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. The Prime Minister of Thailand, His Excellency General Prayut Chan-o-cha, has recorded a welcome address for the occasion of Commission session. May I invite the conference room officer to play the video.
ท่านประธาน ท่านเลขาธิการบริหาร ESCAP ท่านผู้มีเกียรติที่เคารพ ผมมีความยินดีและเป็นเกียรติที่ได้กล่าวเปิดการประชุมประจำปีของ ESCAP อีกครั้งหนึ่งในปีนี้ เป็นเวลากว่า1 ปีแล้วที่ทั่วโลกต้องประสบภัยการแพร่ระบาดของโควิด -19 ซึ่งถือเป็นภัยคุกคามร่วมของมวลมนุษยชาติ และเป็นบททดสอบครั้งสำคัญของความร่วมมือจากทุกภาคส่วนทั้งภายในประเทศและระหว่างประเทศในการฟื้นฟูจากวิกฤตให้กลับมาเข้มแข็งกว่าเดิมตลอดจนเตรียมความพร้อมเพื่อรับมือกับวิกฤตอื่นๆที่อาจจะเกิดขึ้นได้ในอนาคตวิกฤตโควิด -19 ทำให้เราตระหนักว่าการจะ build back better ได้นั้นต้องอาศัยการมีส่วนร่วมอย่างจริงจังและเร่งด่วนจากทุกภาคส่วนในสังคมโดยคำนึงถึงการมีส่วนร่วมของประชาชนเป็นศูนย์กลางและไม่ทิ้งใครไว้ข้างหลังซึ่งจะครอบคลุมมิติต่างๆที่สำคัญคือ 1. ด้านสาธารณสุขควรมีการเสริมสร้างภูมิคุ้มกันและส่งเสริมการเข้าถึงวัคซีนและบริการทางการแพทย์อย่างเสมอภาคซึ่งจะช่วยบรรเทาความรุนแรงจากการเจ็บป่วยและลดอัตราการสูญเสียได้ขณะเดียวกัน การส่งเสริมหลักประกันสุขภาพทั่วหน้าก็เป็นสิ่งจำเป็นอย่างยิ่งเพื่อเสริมสร้างความเข้มแข็งให้ระบบสาธารณสุขต่อการรับมือกับภัยพิบัติและวิกฤตต่างๆได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพยิ่งขึ้นโดยในส่วนของประเทศไทยให้ความสำคัญเรื่องการบูรณาการหลักการกรุงเทพเพื่อการดำเนินการด้านสาธารณสุขตามกรอบเซนได 2. ด้านสังคมควรลงทุนและเพิ่มความเข้มแข็งให้กับระบบคุ้มครองทางสังคมซึ่งจะช่วยลดความเหลื่อมล้ำและเพิ่มขีดความสามารถให้ประชาชนรับมือกับวิกฤตได้ดียิ่งขึ้นเพื่อรักษาไว้ซึ่งสวัสดิภาพและความกินดีอยู่ดีของประชาชนและ 3. ด้านเศรษฐกิจเราต้องเปลี่ยนแปลงแนวทางการพัฒนาเศรษฐกิจไปสู่การสร้างความเติบโตที่สมดุลยั่งยืนและเป็นมิตรกับสิ่งแวดล้อมตลอดจนส่งเสริมเศรษฐกิจดิจิทัลและการเชื่อมโยงทางเศรษฐกิจในบริบทที่เหมาะสมกับประเทศของตนท่านผู้มีเกียรติครับการฟื้นฟูหลังวิกฤตนอกจากต้องพยายามกลับมาเข้มแข็งกว่าเดิมแล้วเราจำเป็นต้องคำนึงถึงการสร้างความเจริญเติบโตที่ลดผลกระทบต่อสิ่งแวดล้อมโดยคงไว้ซึ่งความสมดุลของการอยู่ร่วมกันระหว่างมนุษย์ธรรมชาติและสิ่งแวดล้อมในทุกมิติด้วยเหตุนี้ไทยจึงให้ความสำคัญกับการแก้ไขปัญหาการเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศและการพัฒนาสู่เศรษฐกิจคาร์บอนต่ำโดยจะยกระดับการดำเนินการของภาคส่วนต่างๆภายในประเทศอย่างจริงจังนอกจากนี้ในฐานะที่ไทยเป็นประเทศกำลังพัฒนาและได้รับผลกระทบระยะยาวจากปัญหาการเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศเป็นลำดับต้นๆของโลกเราจึงให้ความสำคัญอย่างยิ่งต่อประเด็นการปรับตัวต่อผลกระทบของการเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศและการสร้างความต้านทานต่อผลกระทบจากภัยพิบัติต่างๆซึ่งนับวันจะเกิดขึ้นบ่อยครั้งและรุนแรงมากยิ่งขึ้นขณะเดียวกันไทยอยู่ระหว่างการขับเคลื่อนการพัฒนาประเทศตามแนวคิดโมเดลเศรษฐกิจ BCG หรือเศรษฐกิจชีวภาพเศรษฐกิจหมุนเวียนและเศรษฐกิจสีเขียวซึ่งจะเป็นแนวทางการพัฒนาเศรษฐกิจที่มุ่งเน้นการใช้ประโยชน์จากฐานทรัพยากรที่เป็นจุดแข็งของไทยให้เต็มศักยภาพอาทิความหลากหลายทางชีวภาพโดยอาศัยวิทยาศาสตร์เทคโนโลยีและนวัตกรรมเป็นเครื่องมือในการสร้างมูลค่าดังนั้น BCG Economy จึงถือเป็นการปรับวิถีเศรษฐกิจไทยจากเดิมที่เป็นการผลิตมากแต่สร้างรายได้น้อยไปสู่การผลิตน้อยแต่สร้างรายได้มากตามแนวทางหลักปรัชญาของเศรษฐกิจพอเพียงซึ่งจะช่วยขับเคลื่อนการบรรลุเป้าหมายตามวาระการพัฒนาที่ยั่งยืนคศ. 2030 ได้ผมเชื่อมั่นว่าหากทุกฝ่ายเปลี่ยนแนวทางการดำเนินความสัมพันธ์จากการแข่งขันหรือเผชิญหน้ามาสู่การสร้างความร่วมมืออย่างสร้างสรรค์ภายใต้ความเป็นหุ้นส่วนระหว่างกันโดยเฉพาะการเพิ่มขีดความสามารถของกันและกันผ่านการลงทุนด้านทรัพยากรการถ่ายทอดองค์ความรู้และเทคโนโลยีและการพัฒนาศักยภาพมนุษย์จะส่งผลให้ทุกฝ่ายสามารถมีบทบาทร่วมกันอย่างสร้างสรรค์ในการฟื้นฟูจากวิกฤตให้กลับมาเข้มแข็งกว่าเดิมเพื่อมุ่งสู่การพัฒนาที่สมดุลยืดหยุ่นและยั่งยืนนอกจากนั้นในสถานการณ์เช่นนี้เราควรร่วมกันฟื้นฟูจากวิกฤตโดยไม่เลือกปฏิบัติเพื่อเสริมสร้างความสามัคคีในสังคมตลอดจนเพื่อสร้างหลักประกันว่าจะไม่มีใครถูกทิ้งไว้ข้างหลังสำหรับการพัฒนาต่อไปในอนาคตดังนั้นผมจึงขอถือโอกาสนี้เรียกร้องให้พวกเราทุกคนร่วมกันต่อต้านการเลือกปฏิบัติการรังเกียจเดียดฉันการสร้างความเกลียดชังและความรุนแรงที่จะกระทำต่อบุคคลใดๆอันเนื่องมาจากความแตกต่างทางเชื้อชาติเพศศาสนาหรือการเมืองตลอดจนทำความเข้าใจและยอมรับความต่างดังกล่าวเพื่อให้เกิดสันติภาพอย่างยั่งยืนโอกาสนี้ผมขอชื่นชมและยืนยันความพร้อมที่จะสนับสนุนการดำเนินงานของ ESCAP ในการเป็นสะพานเชื่อมให้เกิดความร่วมมือและการแลกเปลี่ยนแบ่งปันประสบการณ์โดยเฉพาะแนวทางการพัฒนาของแต่ละประเทศสมาชิกรวมทั้งการสร้างความเป็นหุ้นส่วนในระดับภูมิภาคตลอดจนการระดมทรัพยากรเพื่อการพัฒนาในภูมิภาคและให้ความช่วยเหลือทางเทคนิคระหว่างกันโดยเฉพาะในด้านการรับมือและลดความเสี่ยงจากภัยพิบัติ และด้านวิทยาศาสตร์เทคโนโลยีและนวัตกรรมเพื่อเตรียมความพร้อมและลดความเหลื่อมล้ำระหว่างประเทศต่างๆในการเข้าสู่ยุคดิจิทัลในโอกาสครบรอบ 75 ปี การเป็นสมาชิกของไทยในสหประชาชาติในปี 2564 และการก่อตั้ง ESCAP ในปี 2565 ไทยในฐานะประเทศเจ้าบ้านของ ESCAP จะร่วมมือกับประเทศต่างๆในภูมิภาคเพื่อขับเคลื่อนการดำเนินงานของ ESCAP อย่างเข้มแข็งต่อไปโดยจะทำงานร่วมกับประเทศต่างๆในฐานะหุ้นส่วนเพื่อฟื้นฟูให้ภูมิภาคของเรากลับมาเข้มแข็งกว่าเดิมไม่ทิ้งใครไว้ข้างหลังเติบโตอย่างสมดุลและเป็นมิตรต่อสิ่งแวดล้อมเพื่อส่งต่อชีวิตที่ดีให้กับอนุชนรุ่นต่อไปและนี่คือภารกิจร่วมกันของเราครับขอบคุณครับ
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we shall now take up agenda item 2 on the theme of the 77th session, Building Back Better from Crisis Through Regional Cooperation in Asia and the Pacific. To introduce the theme of the session, the Secretariat has prepared a brief video. May I invite the conference room officer to play the video.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been an unprecedented catastrophe, leading to health, social and economic crises throughout the Asia-Pacific region. Few countries have been spared. While this year offers a glimmer of hope of a reopened and revitalised world, we need to ensure our region is focused on building back better. At this 77th session of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, we come together to discuss 4 priority areas to put the region back on track towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The first, extending social protection, places vulnerable people at the forefront of the rebuilding strategy. Currently, half of the region's population has no access to any form of social protection. If governments were to commit to providing universal child benefits, disability benefits and old age pensions, it's predicted 1 in 3 people would be lifted out of poverty. Investing in a sustained economic recovery is another crucial step of the rebuilding process. The COVID-19 pandemic placed national budgets under immense pressure. If member states were to reduce spending in areas unrelated to development, while simultaneously promoting a progressive taxation system, it could provide a way out of future economic issues. Keeping goods and information flowing is vital to ensure our economies rebound smoothly. Half of the region's population still lacks access to the internet, and this digital divide is most pronounced in remote and island communities. Governments must prioritise the building of digital infrastructure as well as easing digital and trade barriers to ensure resilient supply chains and promote economic opportunity. The final initiative, protecting environmental health, is aimed at avoiding future pandemics. It's predicted zoonotic diseases like COVID-19 will become more common in the future as land clearing and urban sprawl alter the way humans and animals interact. The region must treat this pandemic as a wake-up call and urgently improve regulations aimed at pollution and land clearing, promote sustainable consumption and address climate change. So long as countries in Asia and the Pacific combine national action with coordinated regional cooperation, we will all emerge from the pandemic more prosperous, resilient and unified.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the Commission has received video messages from several leaders from around the Asia-Pacific region, sharing their perspectives on the topic of this year's session, Building Back Better from Crisis Through Regional Cooperation in Asia and the Pacific. First, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, His Excellency Mr. Muhammad Ashraf Ghani.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Fellow heads of states and government, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to address the 77th session of ESCAP. I extend Afghanistan's gratitude to Her Excellency Alisa Jabana for her leadership at this critical time for our region and the world. The theme of this year's session is timely and urgent. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated inequalities and exposed structural inequalities in our global systems. We must muster a true sense of urgency to address the interrelated challenges of social protection, stimulation of sustainable recovery, strengthening of connectivity and supply chains, and focusing on climate change. It is imperative that we build back better, greener, and more equal, robust, and connected, including by ensuring universal and equitable access to vaccines as a global public good. If we fail, the 2030 agenda will be beyond reach. A key lesson from the pandemic has been the centrality of regional connectivity and integration in enabling us to manage turbulence and promote recovery. Without the solidarity of our neighbors and the generous support of the region, Afghanistan as a landlocked developing country, the scale and scope of adverse impacts of the pandemic would have been greater than expected. I further take this opportunity to extend a special thanks to the Asian Development Bank, European Union, the World Bank, and our bilateral donors for their support in response to and recovery from the pandemic. I also wish to recognize India's and COVAX's transfer of vaccines to Afghanistan. By pursuing regional sustainable infrastructure investments, we hope to integrate the region further and create more efficient and effective supply chains. We're investing in our people and expanding social protection systems to all Afghans to eradicate poverty and promote growth. We're pursuing climate change adaptation and resilience programs and taking decisive steps to protect our natural environment. We are also investing in the future through greater digitalization and the promotion of education. These efforts and their effects were recently presented in Afghanistan's report on the implementation of the Istanbul Programme of Action. We're additionally pursuing further analysis of the implementation of the SDGs in Afghanistan in preparation for our presentation of Afghanistan's second voluntary national review at the high-level political forum this year. Our efforts are dependent on the continued support of the region and the close cooperation of all partners. It is also dependent on peace. Armed conflict is inflicting a huge toll on our lives and livelihoods, with the economic damage inflicted in 2019 alone estimated at 18.6% of the GDP. The cost of conflict between 1978 and 2001 alone has been estimated at over $240 billion by the World Bank. Peace, therefore, is a national imperative. The government of Afghanistan is committed to an Afghan-owned and Afghan-led, inclusive peace process and to a political settlement that maintains a sovereign, united, democratic, neutral, and connected Afghanistan, where all Afghans feel protected, respected, and included in the decision-making process. While the risk of failure in bringing a meaningful peace to Afghanistan can be catastrophic, not just for Afghanistan, but for the entire region, success in Afghanistan will lend itself to a new era of regional cooperation at a time when regional challenges, from terrorism and extremism to natural disasters, from COVID-19 pandemic to environmental challenges to persistent poverty, all require collective action. To achieve our collective goals, we must accelerate the reform of the United Nations. Mid-20th century assumptions and governance models cannot respond to the urgent challenges of 2021. Afghanistan is ready to pioneer approaches to stakeholder governance and stakeholder economic development that would result in integration of systems of state building, market building, peace building in regional connectivity and prosperity. Thank you.
Now, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video message of the President of Azerbaijan, His Excellency Mr. Ilham Aliyev.
Distinguished heads of state and government, distinguished Under-Secretary General for the United Nations. First of all, I'd like to express gratitude for the invitation to address 77th session of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific. Azerbaijan attaches great importance to its relations with countries from Asia and Pacific. COVID-19 pandemic exposed the world have already been used. It constitutes 14% of our total population. However, the efforts taken on the national level only are not enough to successfully eliminate pandemic. Azerbaijan is on the forefront of the efforts to mobilize global action against pandemic. As the chair of the non-aligned movement, Azerbaijan initiated and successfully held the NAM summit in response to coronavirus in May 2020. The special session of the UN General Assembly at the level of the heads of state and government was held on our initiative last December. We are deeply concerned by vaccine nationalism and unfair distribution of vaccines among developing and developed countries. More than 30 rich countries ordered 53% of the world's supply of vaccines. Azerbaijan, as a chair of NAM and in its national capacity, will continue its struggle for the just distribution of vaccines worldwide, as well as access of developing and least developed countries to vaccines. Recently, the Human Rights Council unanimously adopted the resolution on equitable access for all countries to vaccines put forward by Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Azerbaijan provided humanitarian and financial assistance to more than 30 countries in relation to coronavirus, most of which are least developed countries. Last year, Azerbaijan put an end to nearly 30 years of occupation by Armenia of almost 20% of its territories. As a result of occupation and ethnic cleansing policy of Armenia, more than 1 million Azerbaijanis were expelled from their native lands. In 1992, Armenia committed the Khojaly genocide, killing 613 innocent civilians, including women and children. The Khojaly genocide has been recognized by 13 states. The United Nations Security Council adopted 4 resolutions in 1993 demanding the full, immediate, and unconditional withdrawal of armed forces of Armenia from all the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. However, these resolutions were never implemented by Armenia. I invite partner countries to join efforts to propose an elaborate mechanism of implementation of UN Security Council resolutions in order to avoid double standards. We all witnessed that some Security Council resolutions are implemented within days, but in our case, they remained unfulfilled for 27 years. There was no hope that Armenia would comply with demands of the Security Council resolutions. No pressure and sanctions was imposed on Armenia throughout all these years. Instead, Armenian military political leadership was threatening Azerbaijan with new war for new territories. In July 2020, Armenia perpetrated military provocation along the state border. In August, Armenian sabotage group attempted to penetrate through the line of contact. On September 27, Armenia launched large-scale military aggression against Azerbaijan, heavily shelling the military and civilian populations. Azerbaijan was compelled to launch counter-offensive operations to defend its citizens. Azerbaijan implemented Security Council resolutions and norms and principles of international law itself and restored the historical justice and its territorial integrity. During 44 days of the patriotic war, armed forces of Armenia were totally destroyed. Armenia was forced to sign the Act of Capitulation on 10th November 2020. Thus, Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict is over. The conflict was left in the past. All Azerbaijani cities and villages have been razed to the ground by Armenia during the occupation. Agdam city is called Hiroshima of Caucasus by foreign experts. Armenia deliberately vandalized, desecrated, and pillaged our cultural and religious sites. More than 60 mosques were destroyed by Armenia. Mosques were turned into cowshed and pigsty. Now there is a huge task before us: reconstruction of completely destroyed cities and villages, all cultural and religious heritage sites in the liberated territories. Smart city, smart village, and green energy concepts will be applied in the process of reconstruction. I invite companies from friendly countries to join the large-scale reconstruction in the liberated territories, the size of which is 4 times larger than Luxembourg. Recently, I defined national priorities on socio-economic development for the next 10 years. Competitive human capital and space for modern innovations, return to the liberated territories, clean environment and green growth country were identified as our key priorities. Azerbaijan is eager to maintain sustainable peace and security in the region. Azerbaijan has made enormous contribution to the launch of regional connectivity projects such as East-West, North-South, North-West transportation corridors. We are now working on the realization of Zengezur transportation corridor, which will be an integral part of the East-West corridor connecting Asia and Europe through Azerbaijan. The corridor will allow Azerbaijan to strengthen its position as Eurasia's transport and logistic hub. I invite partner countries from Asia and the Pacific to consider the potential of this regional project. Thank you for your attention.
Next, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the President of Indonesia, His Excellency Mr. Joko Widodo, please.
Executive Secretary of the UN ESCAP, Armida Ali Shahbana, and all delegates, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us of the weakness of health infrastructure at the national, regional, and global levels, and how fragile our economy is from external shocks. Therefore, together, we must reflect upon ourselves and correct our course. The Asia and Pacific region must soon come out from the pandemic and become stronger. Recover together, recover stronger. Allow me to share some thoughts. First, we must expand investment in strengthening regional health resilience. The region's health expenditures are still low. In South Asia, for instance, at only 3.48% of the GDP, while East Asia and the Pacific at 6.67%, compared to in Latin America, 7.96%, in the European Union, 9.85%, and in the United States, 16.89%. This needs to be corrected. ESCAP must become the catalyst in strengthening the region's health infrastructure through enhancing the quality of health personnel collaborating in health, pharmaceutical, vaccines, and medical raw materials industries, and research and technology in the health sector. The capacity for pandemic early warning in the region must also be strengthened. Second, we have to adapt towards economic recovery. Investment on digital-based economy must be scaled up. Innovation to support safe tourism must be undertaken. The strengthening and expanding of regional supply chains must be enhanced, including MSMEs' access to the supply chain. ESCAP can be the catalyst to expedite post-pandemic regional economic recovery. Third, our investment on green economy and development has to be accelerated. Economic recovery must not be at the cost of the environment. The threat of climate change are real, especially for our brothers and sisters in the Pacific. Now is the time to invest on a green economy. And there are plenty business opportunities on green economy and development. They can reach up to $10.1 trillion and open up around 395 million new job opportunities until 2030. This sector becomes one of Indonesia's priorities as we approach the centennial of our independence in 2045. Transitioning to a more environmentally friendly energy, developing biofuels, developing lithium battery and electric vehicle industries, developing green industrial park, the world's largest, that we will build in North Kalimantan. We need to have the courage to make breakthroughs. Technological innovation is an absolute necessity. ESCAP needs to push the formulation of green economy and development agenda target and incentives in the region, including support for countries in the Pacific. Indonesia is committed to support economic recovery and green development of our friends in the Pacific. Excellencies, next year marks the 75th anniversary of ESCAP. This pandemic must become a momentum to improve and make giant leaps forward. Now is the time for us to build a better region, a better world. Thank you.
Now may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the President, Head of Government and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Immigration of the Republic of Kiribati, His Excellency Mr. Taneti Mahamal. Please.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government and people of Kiribati, I am very delighted and honored to address you all in this video statement. Let me greet you warmly and in His holy name, Kamnabaninimaud. The fact that we have delegations joining the 77th session of ESCAP in person and virtually clearly demonstrates the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic and our resolve to persevere and build back better from crisis through regional cooperation. The theme for this session cannot be more pertinent, asking the question of how governments, communities, families and individuals can work alongside one another to address and overcome terrible afflictions plaguing our communities. These are difficult and uncertain times, which calls for stronger cooperation and reminds us of the strength we have in unity to build back from crisis through regional cooperation. In order for us to help our neighbors and contribute During times of crisis, we need first to address our own issues at home. One of the most prominent issues is the adverse effects of climate change on our daily lives. I am thankful for the support we continue to receive from our partners, which have assisted us in our tireless work to build resilience against climate change impacts and relieve pressure on our scarce and limited financial resources. Our national budget for 2021 was delivered to Parliament in December 2020 with a key focus on embracing the new normal. Accordingly, and in line with our theme for the 77th session, my government acknowledges the importance of regional cooperation with our ESCAP family, and many budget priorities have been allocated to focus on building back and recovering by investing and leveraging strategic partnerships to ensure protection of the most vulnerable, including safeguarding our development progress during these challenging times. Although Kiribati remains COVID-free, it is not without its challenges. Since the closure of our borders in March 2020, countless of Kiribati nationals have been effectively stranded in foreign countries. Until October 2020, we have been unable to repatriate our stranded nationals due to limited resources to establish proper quarantine centers. But since then, and with the support of our partners, we have successfully managed to upgrade and utilize some of our pre-existing buildings deemed appropriate for quarantine measures and begun the repatriation process. And I'm pleased to share that more than 70% have been safely reunited with their families. I wish to reiterate our continued trust in our ESCAP family to lead our region to a more prosperous and sustainable future. Kiribati believes in the spirit of unity, fellowship, and helping one another in times of great need. We are always ready to offer and contribute however little or insignificant it may be. I wish to conclude my remarks by bestowing upon us all the Kiribati traditional blessings of the Maori, the Roi, or the Tabimo, which means health, peace, and prosperity.
Now, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video message from the President of Kyrgyzstan, His Excellency Mr. Sadyr Japarov.
Уважаемая госпожа исполнительный секретарь, Ваше Превосходительство, для меня является большой честью выступить с приветственным словом на открытии 77-й сессии ESCAP. В этот непростой период для всего человечества перед вами стоит весьма важная задача – выработать решение по укреплению экономического сотрудничества в регионе во время пандемии по принципу «лучше, чем было». Пандемия COVID-19 привела к серьезным проблемам в международной торговле во всем мире, в том числе в Азиатско-Тихоокеанском регионе. Это поставило под угрозу дальнейшую полноценную реализацию целей устойчивого развития. Большинство развивающихся стран лишились существенной части доходов, а ресурсы, которые они имеют, вынуждены направлять на ликвидацию последствий пандемии. В прошлом году в ходе политического форума по устойчивому развитию Кыргызстан представил свой первый национальный добровольный обзор достижения целей устойчивого развития. Этот доклад был составлен с учетом влияния COVID-19 на реализацию поставленных целей. В нем также отражены сферы, где нам необходима международная поддержка. В этой связи мы надеемся, что ESCAP продолжит уделять пристальное внимание вопросам дальнейшего достижения целей устойчивого развития. Уважаемая госпожа Алишабана, уважаемые участники заседания, Кыргызская республика является развивающейся горной страной, не имеющей выхода к морю. Данное обстоятельство значительно затрудняет наши возможности по ведению внешней торговли. В этой связи мы приветствуем поддержку ESCAP по линии специальной программы ООН для экономик Центральной Азии. Кыргызская республика нуждается в доступе к портам Тихого, Индийского и Атлантического океанов. Следовательно, Кыргызстан заинтересован в привлечении иностранных инвесторов в страну. Мы активно работаем над улучшением инвестиционной и торговой политики. Наша основная цель – это создание благоприятных условий для ведения бизнеса, обеспечение защиты прав предпринимателей и инвесторов. В условиях пандемии нам необходимо не создавать препятствия и новые барьеры, а максимально сотрудничать в целях развития торговли и повышения уровня жизни населения. В завершении желаю всем участникам заседания дальнейшей плодотворной работы и успехов в достижении наших общих целей. Спасибо за внимание.
Next, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the President of the Marshall Islands, His Excellency Mr. David Kabua.
Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from the Republic of the Marshall Islands. It is my pleasure to join you all here today for the 77th session of the Commission to ESCAP. Excellencies, it is renowned that the COVID-19 pandemic has created one of the worst catastrophes in Asia and the Pacific since World War II. While the RMI and many of our friends in the Pacific have been fortunate to stay COVID-free, we empathize with the rest of our neighbors in the region and the world who have been drastically impacted. We have all experienced the impacts of the pandemic in one way or another. We have all experienced the elements of the sudden economic downfall, including constraints in the trading sector and the hardships in the tourism industry. In the Marshall Islands, shutting down our borders and imposing strict restrictions has severely impacted our supply chains and our primary economic engine of fisheries and caused a near halt to air travel. But throughout our experiences, we were able to identify the weaknesses in our existing systems, specifically in health, societies, and digital connectivity and environment. In addressing these critical areas, the RMI government has taken actions in reforming and adapting new policies to minimize the socio-economic impacts of the pandemic. Excellencies, now is the opportunity to rethink and identify more effective approaches in our development goals as we build back better. In order to do this, multilateral institutions and regional cooperation must be strengthened. The Marshall Islands commends ESCAP for the current reform undertaken to ensure more effective and adequate support to countries. We are also grateful for the continued support to Asia and the Pacific, and particularly in our pursuit to achieving the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals. We therefore look forward to continuing to work collaboratively in delivering tangible results in this endeavor. In this regard, the UN system needs to assure that island-tailored solutions play an important role in regional assistance, including through meaningful implementation of the UN's Samoa Pathway for SIDS. As we transition into a new multi-country UN office in the North Pacific Islands sub-region, it is vital that one-size-fits-all approaches are avoided when they fail to address our unique scale, and that there is greater coherence between national circumstances and wider strategies. In order to ensure sustainability of current policy responses to COVID-19, we need adaptive solutions that sustains us in the longer term. For a low-lying island nation, that means better access to financing and adaptive capacity building. The Marshall Islands still continues to recognize the need for strengthened regional cooperation and coordination with development partners for recovery to be prompt and effective. But while we pursue wider regional action, the international system must continue to adjust for our island sub-region in specific deliverable programming approaches, not just in spirit or good intention. Excellencies, the Marshall Islands is keen on strengthening this sub-regional mechanism for improved coordination and utilizing it to progress the region's implementation of the 2030 Agenda in Building Back Better. Kumol Dada.
Now, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the President of Mongolia, His Excellency Mr. Battulga Khalkhmaa.
Mr. Chair, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to address virtually at the opening of the 77th session of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. I'm confident that this session of the Commission will contribute to setting out policies and identifying common goals designed to overcome the social and economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has brought the most serious social and economic devastations to the world since World War II. It remains unclear when the crisis will end, when countries will accomplish social and economic recovery, and when humanity will adapt to the new normal. Although each country is taking steps to overcome the crisis, we need to fight the crisis together and further enhance multilateral cooperation. The speedy and efficient vaccination against the pandemic is the best solution to returning life to normal. Equal distribution and access to vaccines is the most effective way to overcome the crisis together. Nobody is safe until everyone is safe. Mr. Chair, it is clear that social protection responses to the pandemic by many governments will hinder the economic recovery. It is important to look at the big picture of how to successfully overcome the current crisis, integrate the economic recovery with people-centered development policies, and address the challenges. The present situation requires change in our understanding on the economic system that we know, including the notion of a growth-based economy. In the future, the difference between developing and developed countries will be widened, and the debt is expected to rise. Also, it is expected that there will be slow and delayed implementation of goals, such as achieving sustainable development, developing transport connectivity, building a fair society, and delivering accessible healthcare and social services. Therefore, it is crucial to expand international cooperation, develop a unified long-term policy aimed at improving human development and livelihood and ensuring environmental sustainability. We expect that this unified policy will be as a signal of change and an opportunity to lead the new conditions, to see holistically and give impetus to a solution. Infrastructure, energy, and transport are the central development pillars of landlocked developing countries like Mongolia. In this regard, we propose to jointly implement a project to build an energy power grid to address the rational use and distribution of power in Northeast Asia. In the region, which is rich in renewable energy, the project is expected to not only increase the use of renewable energy, but also make a significant contribution to environmental protection and the fight against climate change. Lastly, it is my firm belief that the deed to build the most prosperous and most crisis-resilient Asia-Pacific will be realized and implemented. I thank you for your attention.
Next, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the President of Tajikistan, His Excellency Mr. Emomali Rahmon.
Excellency Chairperson, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ladies and gentlemen. I, at the onset, would like to extend deep appreciation to Ms. Armida Salsi-Alis-Jahbano, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, for convening the high-level meeting. Today's event is very important and timely, given the current threats and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still ongoing in many countries worldwide. These days, no country or industry in the world is immune from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, the pandemic is a factor in the unprecedented rise in global unemployment, which could leave many countries with food insecurity. Although, according to the World Health Organization, approximate death toll from this disease is known, the financial and economic impacts of the COVID-19 are yet to be fully assessed. Distinguished Chairperson, the global intensification of the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to take specific measures in our country to prevent this disease, mitigate socio-economic damage, and support vital sectors of society. We have revised the public budget for 2020, taking into account the reduction of budget revenues and the growing demand for funding social sector, particularly healthcare and other unforeseen spending, and made relevant amendments in the revenue, expenses, and deficit indicators, including more than 30 hospitals with 7,000 beds and 5,400 doctors and medical staff have been mobilized in the country for the full and timely treatment of people with infectious diseases COVID-19. 16,000 beds were prepared in 92 hospitals and medical institutions. Additional financial resources were allocated from the state budget to the health sector to purchase medical equipment and medicines, and for the construction of temporary hospitals and the support of medical personnel. To support the private sector, significant tax and credit benefits, privilege and compensation had been provided to our entrepreneurs and small and medium businesses. Social benefits were paid for vulnerable groups of the population during the pandemic. Over 193,000 permanent and seasonal jobs were created during this period of time. To ensure food security in the country and increase level of domestic production, the field of the main sowing and reproduction of agricultural crops has been increased to tens of thousands of hectares. Given our social-oriented public budget, 48% of the budget expenses last year has been allocated for the social sector. Furthermore, to eliminate the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, the government of Tajikistan has expanded productive cooperation with development partners, in particular with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and other international financial institutions. Taking this opportunity, I would like to express profound gratitude to all states and international organizations, including the United Nations and its specialized agencies, particularly the World Health Organization, development partners, international and regional financial institutions for support they gave Tajikistan during the pandemic. Distinguished Chairperson, it is essential to note that regardless of measures taken by the government, the economy of the Republic of Tajikistan still suffers from the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. Although no case of COVID-19 infectious disease has been registered across Tajikistan since the beginning of the year. Therefore, the post-COVID-19 period economic recovery, stimulation of small and medium-sized businesses, support a vulnerable group of population, implementation of anti-epidemiological measures, particularly immunization programs from all countries, including the Asia-Pacific region, require additional financial resources. In this situation, countries of our region, along with extending social protection, need to invest in sustainable economic recovery, supporting trade, ensuring the smooth transportation of essential items, in particular food and medicine, and protecting the environment. Counter possible future threats and crises, diversify the economy, promote the digitalization process, adapt to the climate change, and foster transition to the green economy. In this sensitive and challenging time, coordinated actions and mutual support are essential for the entire global community. I thank you for your attention.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, may I now invite the conference room officer to play the video of the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, also chair of the Pacific Island Forum, His Excellency Mr. Kausea Natano.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor once again to speak at the Commission on behalf of my country and that of the Pacific Islands Forum. When we met last year, we never imagined a world ravaged by COVID-19, which we have now. As summarized in the FAME study, while the Pacific was largely spared by COVID-19 due to our swift containment measures, it has devastated our economies, particularly the services industries, tourism, retail trade, hospitality, and civil aviation. And if I might add, it also severely affected the fishing industry, on which many of our small economies are dependent for protein and revenues. In reality, COVID-19 has exacerbated the persistent vulnerabilities and dependencies that continue to challenge our Blue Pacific. And I commend ESCAP for highlighting many of these. Low social protection coverage at the fate of potential beneficiaries in the Pacific Islands is an important indicator of vulnerability to pandemics and economic and climate-related shocks. Financing universal social protection coverage is smart investment, and I recognize the need for the Pacific to look at how we can benefit from the action plan for the strengthened regional cooperation on social protection in Asia and the Pacific. As a leader of one of the smallest and isolated of countries, I also appreciate the importance given to the role of connectivity and transport. Low digital and shipping connectivity in the Pacific Islands makes us particularly vulnerable to trade fluctuations and other restrictions caused by the pandemic, and has led to the prioritization of the digital economy by our forum economic ministers. This is an area we need to intensify our cooperation with Asia, given the dominant role it plays in trade, shipping, and ICT. The fiscal responses of the Pacific small island states to COVID-19 are small despite the severe impact of COVID-19 on tourism. But at the same time, these may be putting several of our governments at high risk of public debt distress. The point here is that the small island economies have limited capacity to respond to externally driven shocks, be they pandemics, financial crises, or climate-related disasters, and should be given special consideration in accessing finance and debt relief. The theme study reminds us that Asia and the Pacific is home to extensive low-lying territories and small islands, developing states that are menaced by rising sea levels and extreme weather patterns. Impact includes more frequent storms and floods, escalating heat waves and droughts, and acidification and coral bleaching. Last year, as Forum Chair, I reminded the General Assembly that climate change remained the single greatest threat to the livelihoods, security, and well-being of the people of the Pacific, and that we should respond to COVID-19 in a way that promotes the well-being of people while accelerating global efforts needed to deliver on the Paris Agreement's commitments and more. Finally, effective responses to COVID-19 and to climate change necessitates much stronger multilateralism and regionalism in support of the 2030 Agenda and the Samoa Pathway. And we look to the Commission and the Secretary to ensure that regionalism in Asia and the Pacific is pursued in a manner that is differentiated and fair to vulnerable nations and communities. I thank you.
Now, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Her Excellency Ms. Sheikh Hasina.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. His Excellency Executive Secretary, UN, ESCAP, Excellencies, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. I am delighted to join the 77th annual session of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. The COVID-19 pandemic has devastated the health systems and economies across the globe. Nearly 2.95 million people have died and hundreds more are dying every day of the deadly disease. The pandemic has made many people poorer while many others are sliding back to poverty. In Bangladesh, we have announced a stimulus package worth about $14.6 billion, around 4.44% of our GDP, for widening social protection, retaining jobs and bolstering the economy. Excellencies, our latest 5-year plan included strategies for recovery from COVID-19 and preparing Bangladesh for smooth and sustainable LDC graduation, achieving SDGs and setting a trajectory towards a prosperous country by 2041. We have continued to move forward with environmental management. Adaptation efforts to climate change have been supported by programs funded through the Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund. We see regional cooperation as the most viable option for shared prosperity. We are engaged in SAARC, BIMSTEC, BBIN, BCIMEC and trilateral highway initiatives. The South-South Network for Pacific Service Innovation helps Bangladesh through partnership with other countries. Bangladesh is an ardent supporter of increased connectivity and ESCAP's initiative of the Asian Highway and Trans-Asian Railway. Bangladesh is also actively engaging with the cross-border paperless trade, Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement, PPP networking, renewable energy and other initiatives of UN ESCAP. We are committed to achieving global compact for safe, orderly and regular migration. Excellencies, Bangladesh is hosting over 1.1 million forcefully displaced Rohingyas from Myanmar. We urge the international community to remain focused on this issue for a viable solution through sustainable repatriation. Before I conclude, I recommend taking some measures through ESCAP. Number one, the developed world, development partners and IFIS should come forward in attaining quick recovery from the COVID pandemic. Number two, to build back better from any crisis, the development approach should be more inclusive, resilient and environment friendly. Number three, the Asia-Pacific region should take efficient policies and strategies for a strengthened and universal public health system. Number four, we need to establish seamless connectivity in the areas of trade, transport, energy and ICT, science and technology. I thank you all again.
Next, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the Prime Minister of Bhutan, His Excellency Dr. Lotai Tshering.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to convey the warm greetings of His Majesty the King, Her Majesty the Queen, and people of Bhutan from the land of gross national happiness. We join the region in expressing solidarity as we continue to battle with the pandemic. Our hearts and prayers are with all the families who have lost their loved ones. I am pleased that the 77th ESCAP Commission is being held at this critical time. It offers us the platform to share experiences and help redirect ourselves as we move on. Excellencies, I am grateful for the partnership and support we have received under ESCAP. At this stage, we are reflecting on the journey so far, on how we are fighting the pandemic so that we can better prepare ourselves to deal with similar eventualities in future. Drawing lessons from here, we are also looking at the improvement of overall health delivery. For Bhutan, the biggest challenge we face is the lack of capacity to produce within the country. Simple gears like gloves, the test kits, PPEs, and even syringes have to be imported. These essentials will always be in short supply whenever the global need is acute. So we are asking, how do we solve these issues hereafter? Everything related to health is urgent. This fact has to sink in rather than reacting during acute emergencies. Being a small, resource-constrained country, we are faced with numerous hurdles. However, for decades, our biggest strength has been our leadership, who has always inspired us to make the best of our smallness. We have a 21st century king who guides us with modern empirical knowledge, but he also stands as a symbol of benevolence, whose care and compassion for the people brings everyone together in solidarity and unity. It is for this reason that we are able to make evidence-based decisions and implement effectively on the ground. Under the leadership of His Majesty the King, we embraced a non-compromising strategy to save the lives of the people first. So far, we have recorded only about 1,000 COVID cases with just a single death, that too with underlying comorbid conditions. We have vaccinated almost 95% of the eligible population. Here I would like to thank the Government of India for your generous support with the vaccines. Excellencies, guided by the development principles of gross national happiness, Bhutan has always given a special focus on social sectors. It is also the gross national happiness guided policies that ensured free health care and education for all Bhutanese. Our monarchs always stressed on strengthening these social sectors, saying it is an investment and not expenditure, which is why Bhutanese need not worry about expenses in their health care and education for generations to come. This perhaps is the most sustainable social security ensured for the people of Bhutan. Similarly, this pandemic, in addition to the conventional government-initiated fiscal and monetary measures, our king took upon himself the sacred duty to safeguard the livelihood of the people. In doing so, numerous interventions and incentives were introduced. This included job opportunities, skilling to prepare our youth for the future, unemployment benefits, and in fact, it goes to the extent of paying 50% of loan interest for all Bhutanese. Just recently, these initiatives have been extended till June 2022, giving the people the opportunity to plan and readjust. This would be the most striking feature that would have helped in not just slowing the downturn, but would have provided the much needed cushion to bounce back faster once we reassess the economic curve later on. In keeping with the GNH values, our constitution mandates ensuring 60% of forest cover at all times to come and maintain intergenerational equity of natural resources. When nations are talking about gearing towards carbon neutrality by 2050, Bhutan is already carbon negative. We sink 2.5 times the carbon dioxide we produce. I feel this pandemic brought about the very essence of gross national happiness that seeks well-being of not just yourself, but everyone and everything around us. It has only reminded us that the importance of investment in what really matters, the health and well-being of our people. It has taught us to remain within the limits, and this is exactly what gross national happiness is about. Excellencies, I'm sharing the story of Bhutan as an experience that could be considered while we all seek the obvious in building back better. The concept of development with values could be an integral component of the new normal. Falling back on basic human values is equally important as advancement in technology. We may not have the economic strength to influence, but I feel our story will mean something, a different concept for all of us to consider. On this note, I would like to thank the Executive Secretary for personally showing concerns and reaching out to the smaller and vulnerable nations during these difficult times. I thank you and your team for successfully organizing this virtual session. I look forward to listening and learning from you all. Thank you and Tashidile.
Next, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the Prime Minister of Kingdom of Cambodia, His Excellency Samdech Akkam Mocha Senapati Teko Hansen. Please.
Her Excellency Amida Sasya Ali Jabana, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretaries of UN ESCAP, Excellencies, Madam, Ladies and Gentlemen. Today, I'm pleased to attend the 77th session of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, UN ESCAP, under the theme, Building Back Better from Crisis through Regional Cooperation in Asia and the Pacific. Although the global economy is expected to recover in 2021, yet we are still facing great uncertainty with the resurgence of COVID-19 pandemic, especially the faster than expected mutation of coronavirus, which has continued disrupting the economy's recovery dynamics. In parallel, the disparities between developing countries and developed countries in accessing vaccine can pose risks and hinder the regional and global economic recovery. In short, only a handful of countries could achieve fast recoveries, while many others continue to suffer in both health and economic sectors. In this context, fighting against the COVID-19 and the strengthening of the qualities and effectiveness of the health system is an utmost priority for us. Cambodia would like to emphasize the importance and urgencies of the distribution and utilization of the COVID-19 vaccines in an equitable and affordable manner, especially for developing countries. Besides that, Cambodia would like to appeal to a number of countries not to hoard the vaccine more than needed, as well as not to use the vaccine as a political tool. Taking these opportunities, I would like to share my personal views related to the post-crisis recovery that we have to focus on as follows. First, continuing to promote the support the principles of globalization via expanding greater openness of international trade and supporting stronger multilateralism, as well as to providing preferential treatment to developing countries to ensure that the benefit of globalization are equitably and effectively allocated. Second, promoting digitalization by placing priorities on the establishment of digital government and development of supporting infrastructures, as well as encouraging the private sectors to widely adopt the use of digital technologies, which will serve as a new pillars of economic growth, as well as to promote the competitiveness and economic diversification. Third, enhancing social resilience by strengthening the health system, promoting public health services and social protection systems in terms of qualities and scope, so as to be ready to respond to the crisis or all the risks that may occur in the future, and developing the human resources. Fourth, enhancing the development of small and medium enterprises, SMEs, by promoting and formalization of the business and ensuring access to support, both in terms of policies and financings, as well as the management skill, in order to strengthen their linkage with production chain and their supplies to large industries. At the same time, increasing investment in green infrastructures in order to adapt to the climate change and manage natural disasters with the aim to building resilience to crisis and ensuring sustainability and inclusiveness of socio-economic development. Overall, Cambodia firmly believes that the fight against COVID-19 and the post-crisis recovery requires us to urgently address regional and global challenges in a responsible manner with a spirit of unity, collaboration, and mutual respect. Finally, I wish the 77th session fruitful outcome. Thank you for your kind attention.
Next, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the Prime Minister of Fiji, His Excellency Mr. Josiah Boreke Bainiparama.
The Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Leaders of government, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Bulavanaka and warm greetings from Fiji. This pandemic is not just a health crisis. It is also a social and economic crisis with far-reaching consequences. Indeed, we will be living with those consequences long after we mourn the last victim of the virus. And it is no secret that these consequences are disproportionately harsher for developing countries and small states. We do not have the large, broad-based economies and financial tools that large, developed and advancing developing countries have to spur recovery. Recovery is truly a longer and steeper road for us. Access to concessional finance will be critical in dealing with fiscal and debt risks if we are to have a chance at a sustained economic recovery. Of this, there is no doubt. We are in a crisis, and the global community must make bold collective efforts to build back and to build back better. So the theme for this 77th Commission session, Building Back Better from Crisis Through Regional Cooperation in Asia and the Pacific, could not be better. The 4 areas for regional cooperation that have been proposed in the theme study give us a useful guide for building back better together as a region. The intersection of the pandemic with the climate crisis and the emergencies it brings also exacerbates existing inequalities across a range of areas, including health, education, and livelihoods. Therefore, our actions must be tailored to meet the needs of those who are most vulnerable in our societies and in the greatest danger of being left behind. Small island developing states cannot be forced to sacrifice climate action to meet our immediate socio-economic needs. None of us can succeed alone. Regional policy tools and cooperation mechanisms are necessary to build stronger economies. Sustainable cooperation can help withstand shocks to our economies, yet the current pandemic clearly illustrates our weak cooperation platform as a region. Up to 40% of our region's GDP is dependent on tourism, so our full recovery requires the opening of international borders, which in turn depends on the availability of vaccines. Still, we depend totally on the goodwill of our multilateral and bilateral partners to receive full immunization from COVID-19. But I believe we require stronger dedication and commitment at the ESCAP regional levels. In this last decade of the Agenda 2030, we must resist any attempt to return to the pre-pandemic environmental unsustainable development path, but rather capitalize on the opportunity to build back better through international solidarity and regional cooperation. Thank you.
Next, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, His Excellency Mr. Imran Khan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Executive Secretary, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We are in the midst of an unprecedented global crisis unleashed by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen its devastating health and socio-economic impacts all around the world, with Asia and Pacific also bearing the brunt. Pre-existing vulnerabilities and inequalities have become even more acute. We are now lagging further behind in achieving the SDGs than ever before. Over 100 million people will fall back into extreme poverty. It might take years to regain the pre-COVID income levels. Varying financial capacities, healthcare, and vaccine rollout may lead to uneven recovery among countries and regions. we must ensure that no one is left behind. That requires international solidarity. We need the right mix of national actions, regional collaboration, and multilateral cooperation. I would suggest 4 key areas of focus. First, we have to put the people front and center for pro-poor and inclusive policies. We need to strengthen public health and social protection systems. These have been the primary objectives for us in Pakistan. People-centered economic security is now at the core of our development paradigm. Second, peace and development must be anchored in human rights, which should be upheld and protected universally. The international community needs to pay special attention to situations of foreign occupation. Third, in building back, we have the opportunity to model our economies on more resilient and sustainable grounds on all world forums. At home, we are implementing corresponding fiscal reforms. Ladies and gentlemen, the bigger question is, what mechanisms can help us achieve these ambitious goals? We all want to reinvigorate our economies and build back better, but we cannot do this in isolation. Only through enhanced regional and international cooperation can we reopen safely and sustainably, starting with equitable access to affordable vaccines for all. We have to think in the long term, keeping in mind the best interest of our future generations. Pakistan has shifted its focus from geopolitics to geoeconomics. We are ready to join hands for win-win outcomes. Our success lies in cooperative multilateralism and partnerships. Let Asia Pacific take the lead. Pakistan is willing to work with all members to advance our shared objectives. I thank you.
Now, may I invite the conference room officer to play the video of the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, His Excellency Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa.
Madam Executive Secretary, Chairperson, Excellencies, Aiwan, I am pleased to be able to address you at the 77th session of UN ESCAP. Despite the current challenges, it is very important for us together at this forum. This year's theme is significant and timely as we worked on strategies to overcome this pandemic and started rebuilding our economies and societies. Sri Lanka has made remarkable progress in controlling the spread of COVID-19, recording a very low death rate and high recovery rate through case detection, contact tracing, quarantine, and patient treatment. Sri Lanka's robust public health care system provided free access to health and helped control the pandemic. The government also repatriated nearly 100,000 Sri Lankans and started our vaccination program in February. Even during the pandemic, economic activities continued in several sectors. The export sector continued to function. Tourism restarted in January. The central bank reduced policy rates and implemented several compensatory refinancing programs. Excellencies, our government is deeply committed to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. For this purpose, an interministerial steering committee on sustainable development has been formed under my leadership. Our youth are also an important component of our development agenda. That is why decade 2021 to 2030 has been declared the decade of skill development in our country. We are also keen on strengthening our regional ties and emphasize the need to accelerate the South-South cooperation. Towards that end, we believe UN ESCAP should commit itself to bring relevant and responsive with measures such as assisting small countries with pandemic recovery and vaccination program, encouraging growth of foreign employment opportunities, promoting ecotourism and health tourism, and encouraging investments into and find markets for emerging nations. In conclusion, let me state that we deeply appreciate the timely efforts taken by ESCAP to bring the member states together for a constructive and interactive regional discussion on the COVID-19 pandemic. I wish your forthcoming sessions every success. Thank you.
And finally, allow me to invite the conference room officer to play the video message of the Prime Minister of Uzbekistan, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Aripov.
Hurmatli rais janoblari, hurmatli ijrochi kotib, xonimlar va janoblar, Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining Osiyo va Tinch okeani uchun iqtisodiy va ijtimoiy komissiyasi navbatdagi sessiyasida ishtirok etishdan bag'oyat mamnunman. O'zbekiston komissiyaning bugungi global muammolarini yechish, bu borada xalqaro hamkorlik va integratsiya jarayonlarini yanada rivojlantirishdagi muhim o'rnini alohida e'tirof etadi. O'zbekiston Respublikasi Prezidenti Shavkat Miromonovich Mirziyoyev janob oliylari ushbu tashkilot bilan aloqalarni kengaytirishga katta ahamiyat qaratadilar. Shu munosabat bilan mazkur forum inqirozdan so'ng Osiyo va Tinch okeani hududida avvalgidan ham yaxshiroq tamoyili asosida hamkorlikni qayta tiklash mavzuida bo'lib o'tayotganini qo'llab-quvvatlaymiz. COVID-19 pandemiyasi oqibatlarini bartaraf etish, iqtisodiyotlarimizni qayta tiklash va yangi o'sish nuqtalarini yaratish, a'zo davlatlar o'rtasidagi o'zaro munosabatlarni yanada kuchaytirishni talab etmoqda. Birgalikdagi chora-tadbirlarimiz xalqaro savdoni yanada erkinlashtirish, samarali bank moliya mexanizmlarini joriy etish, soliq va tarif siyosatlarini optimallashtirish, yangi ish o'rinlarini tashkil qilishga qaratilishi maqsadga muvofiq bo'lardi. Oldimizda turgan ushbu vazifalarni muvaffaqiyatli hal etish bo'yicha quyidagi aniq taklif va tashabbuslarga e'tibor berishingizni istar edik. Birinchidan, koronavirus pandemiyasi tufayli jahon miqyosida kambag'allik darajasi keskin oshib borayotgani barchamizni jiddiy tashvishga solmoqda. Kambag'allikni qisqartirish bo'yicha mamlakatlarimiz to'plagan amaliy tajribalar asosida ta'sirchan mexanizmlarni yaratish maqsadida komissiya doirasida qo'shma strategiyani ishlab chiqish zarur deb hisoblaymiz. O'zbekistonda komissiyaning kambag'allikni qisqartirish masalalari bo'yicha mintaqaviy markazini tashkil etishni taklif etamiz. Shu o'rinda bu dolzarb muammoni yechish yo'llarini topish uchun tashkilot huzurida mehnat bozorini rivojlantirish bo'yicha ekspertlik kengashini tuzishni muhim ahamiyat kasb etadi. Ikkinchidan, keng mintaqalarimizda ishlab chiqarish zanjirini yaratish, sanoat kooperatsiyasini yo'lga qo'yish, innovatsiyalar va raqamli texnologiyalarni joriy etish uchun komissiya platformasida Osiyo klasterlari maqsadli dasturini boshlashimiz zarurdir. Uchinchidan, oziq-ovqat xavfsizligini ta'minlash muammolariga alohida e'tibor qaratgan holda komissiyaning qishloq xo'jaligi bo'yicha markazi bilan birgalikda oziq-ovqat sohasida hamkorlikka doir konsepsiyani qabul qilish lozim bo'ladi. Konsepsiyada mamlakatlarimizning oziq-ovqat bozorlaridan va qishloq xo'jaligi samaradorligini oshiradigan ilg'or texnologiyalardan keng foydalanish tarmoqda xalqaro ilmiy tashkilotlar tomonidan tadqiqotlar o'tkazish, davlat va xususiy sektor o'rtasida sheriklikni rivojlantirish mexanizmlarini rag'batlantirish o'z ifodasini topishi muhimdir. To'rtinchidan, mintaqaviy o'zaro bog'liqlikni mustahkamlash, transport infratuzilmalaridan unumli foydalanish va tranzit sohasidagi hamkorlikni kuchaytirish katta ahamiyatga egadir. Biz Xitoydan boshlab Markaziy Osiyo mamlakatlari, hududlari orqali Janubiy Osiyo, Yaqin Sharq va Yevropa bozorlariga chiqadigan multimodal transport koridorlarini rivojlantirish zaruratini alohida ta'kidlaymiz. Toshkentda o'zaro bog'liqlikni ta'minlash bo'yicha tashkil etilayotgan mintaqaviy transport va kommunikatsiya markazi loyihasida ishtirok etish uchun tashkilotga a'zo mamlakatlarni taklif etamiz. 5-dan, hozirgi vaqtda pandemiyadan xoli sayyohlik mahsulotlarini ko'paytirish, ayniqsa havo qatnovlarini tiklash, turizm sohasini rivojlantirish bo'yicha yangicha yondashuvlarni ishlab chiqish muhimdir. Biz pandemiyadan keyin barqaror rivojlanish va barqaror turizm to'g'risidagi rezolyutsiyani qabul qilishni maqsadga muvofiq deb hisoblaymiz. 6-dan, O'zbekiston ijtimoiy taraqqiyotning ajralmas qismi bo'lgan masala, ya'ni xotin-qizlarni faol qo'llab-quvvatlash bo'yicha komissiyaning ayollar uchun axborot kommunikatsiya texnologiyalari tashabbusi dasturiga qo'shilishga tayyorligini ma'lum qilamiz. Bundan tashqari, 2022-yilda tashkil topganining 75 yilligi munosabati bilan Sharqning buyuk allomasi, algoritm asoschisi Muhammad Xorazmiy tug'ilib o'sgan ko'hna Xiva shahrida komissiyaga a'zo davlatlar yosh olimlarining xalqaro kongressini o'tkazishni taklif etamiz. 7-dan, bugungi kunda dolzarb global muammolar va tahdidlarga chuqur tahliliy hamda ilmiy asoslangan aniq javoblar va yechimlar topish naqadar muhim ekanini barchamiz chuqur anglab turibmiz. Bu borada komissiya sessiyalari arafasida tashkilot huzuridagi mintaqaviy institutlar va mamlakatlarimizning yetakchi ilmiy markazlarining qo'shma konferensiyasini o'tkazib borishni taklif etamiz. Hurmatli xonimlar va janoblar, mintaqalarimizning gullab yashnashi va barqaror taraqqiyoti uchun O'zbekiston bundan keyin ham Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining Osiyo va Tinch okeani uchun iqtisodiy va ijtimoiy komissiyasi doirasida keng ko'lamli, ochiq va amaliy aloqalarni izchil rivojlantirib boraveradi. E'tiboringiz uchun rahmat.
Distinguished delegates, this was the last speaker in my list. On behalf of the Commission, I would like to thank the leaders for their special messages, outlining the key priorities for regional cooperation for building back better in the region. This brings us to the end of the proceeding for today, and I would now call on the Secretariat to make any announcement.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'm pleased to announce that this year a number of side events are being hosted by our member states and partner organizations. Tomorrow, Tuesday, 27 April, we will have 3 side events as follows. Sustainable Graduation in the Challenging Situation, Perspectives from Bangladesh and the Region, organized by the government of Bangladesh. Building Resilience to Future Pandemics and Climate Change through the Protection of Nature, an urgent issue for the Maldives and the rest of the world, organized by the government of the Maldives and IUCN. And Modeling Healthy Creative Scene to Build Back Better, organized by the government of Indonesia. On Wednesday, 28th of April, there will be other 3 side events as follows. Debt relief in the aftermath of the pandemic, how can regional dialogue help, organized by the government of Pakistan. Linking the achievement of SDG 1 and SDG 2 to build back better, poverty alleviation through sustainable agricultural development and rural revitalization, organized by the government of China, the International Poverty Reduction Center in China, and the Center for Sustainable Agricultural Mechanization, CSAM. And moving past coal in Asia-Pacific region, organized by the government of Bangladesh. The majority of these side events are open to all participants of the Commission. Details on these events are available on the Commission website. I thank you, Chair.
I thank the Secretariat. On this note, I adjourn this meeting, and we shall reconvene at 10 a.m. Bangkok time sharp tomorrow. So the meeting is adjourned.